Alright, welcome back. So what we've done so far is build all the sets that I owned from that first wave of Bionicle in 2001. What we're going to do now is talk a little bit more, just sticking with the 2001 era Bionicles. Going to be a few more videos here about, things about them, things that I like. So yeah, without further ado, I'll just kind of get going with the concept here, which is, why were Bionicles so successful? Like, what was it about them that kind of like created this like replayability, I think is a good word for it. I know that's almost more of a video game term, but and here's what I think it is that the 6 of these Toa, which is something that they introduce this wave, but is a theme of at least the early Bionicles, like the kind of what people consider to be like the core of Bionicle, those first kind of like 4 or so years, is that you have these 6 characters. They're all very similar but slightly different, and so I just wanted to like take a few minutes to talk about exactly how that works, and so like in a really basic way, just sort of separate these guys out for a bit and talk about it. And so I think the most obvious one is, in this first wave, we have half of them that are symmetrical and half of them are not. So here, we'll look at the guys who are not symmetrical and look at the variability here. So we've got Kopaka, Tahu, and Liwa. Personally, these were kind of my favorites, these 3. I just think that kind of like sword motif is cool. But then even within this, we have variability. So, for starters, we have Kopaka is the only character that has 2 sort of like weapons, if you will, right? He has a sword, and then he also has this shield. So these other 2 guys, right, these are hands that they have. But still, there's some variability here of their hands. As well, there's variability of the arm. So we have, Kopaka has this bent arm type, and Liwa has this bent arm. But Tahu has, what they all use for legs as his arm. And so even though these 2 are both, have their weapon and then have a hand, that's a different secondary arm that they have. And then on top of that, this is an axe, right? Which is somewhat different from these 2 both have swords. And so it's like with very few sort of like actual differences, we've created 3 very different characters. And even these hands are different, right? Liwa doesn't have these axles. He has these pins on this like longer element, which I think I talked about a while ago. I don't really know what the idea was there. And then on top of it, Liwa is the only character, right, that has this swinging arm that's a pin and not an axle that's held in place or a gear arm. He's the only character of the whole wave that's like that. And then I also want to talk for a second about Pahatu before we get like way into Pahatu, but like these guys, he is not technically symmetrical, right? He doesn't have 2 gears for his legs like Anua and Gali do. It's more similar to Tahu, if you can see there, and Kopaka, if you can see here. And then again, they made really interesting choices with like what, based off of the primary color, like what was the secondary color that got used. So Kopaka, being white, has this gray for the secondary color, when almost all these other characters have black as their tertiary color. And then, yeah, with Kopaka, it's even more interesting because his secondary color is gray, and his sort of extra color is gray as well. And so there's all these subtle ways where, and I think some of this was just laziness, right? And just like, of using parts redundantly, but all these ways that the creators of Bionicle and Lego were able to kind of create these little differences that are fun. And then, one of the other things about Kopaka is like, is this a hand, like this technically, or is this a hand? And that's kind of like a debate as well in the community. So And then also, least we forget, Kopaka's the only with the asymmetrical mask. So he has this double thing of 2 weapons, and then he's the only asymmetrical mask. So it's really just like a lot of variation that they introduce in small ways. So that's all for now about these guys, and we'll talk about this other set over here before I make some more comparisons. So as I sort of started to mention, here we've got Onua and Gali, who both have 2 gears, both have the same arm, and kind of have a like gripping, hooking feature as well. And then they also both happen to have inverted legs, which is interesting. They're the only ones that have inverted legs of the 6. And so, right, that's like yet another kind of like variable is the legs. And then on top of this, we'll introduce Bahatu here because he's symmetrical. But, you know, he's sort of different from these two. Because it's his feet that move. You know, he has these hands, again, that we've actually seen over here with, you know, with Tahu. But then again, his hands are black. They're not his primary color. Like, they're not brown. So, like, Lego didn't bother to make this piece in brown. Even though it bothered to make this in red and in green for Liwa. But then I think another interesting point of comparison between Onua and Bahatu is that they both have this like no neck. I mean, I know it's like Bahatu's groin or whatever, but like Onua has you know, this hunchback feature on his chest, right? His head comes out of his chest. And Bahatu just has an inverted torso, which almost, you know, completely breezed past, but you know, he's the only inverted one, very different. And then speaking of this, you know, chest or neck component, we have Onua that has, you know, his head on his chest, whereas the sort of standard approach with these other 3 guys, remember, is this ball thing here, kind of like a heart. And then what's more is that Gali has her own kind of like scuba gear type of thing here. You know, and has this element, this piece on her chest, making her unique in that regard. And then Bahatu actually has nothing here, nothing on his chest, but he's inverted, and so he still has, not only does he have this like no neck feature like Onua, but they also both have, the head is mounted on this piece, like this Chiraga hand type of piece, that sticks forward and makes him a hunchback as well. Then it goes without saying, you know, Bahatu also the only one to have his weapons attached to his feet and not his hands. So there's all of those things. I think there's a few more things to note, right? We were talking about the ball. It's repurposed here to make his shoulders broader. It's the only time. And then another sort of, you know, mass adding feature on Bahatu is he has these things right here that add mass to his legs. But he's not the only one. So Gali has the same thing on her hips right here. I don't know if that's supposed to make her look more feminine or if it's, I'm not really sure. But, you know, we have all these different motifs, but then they're all sort of combined in a bunch of different ways that all of them are unique. I just think Lego really was able to take a limited set of molds and, you know, repurpose them in a bunch of ways to make a real cast of characters here. And I think, you know, apart from that, the only thing we haven't really discussed is the shoulder width. So we have Gali, Onua, and Tahu that have wide shoulders. Bahatu sort of counts, I would say. He does have wide shoulders. You know, other thing I forgot to mention is Bahatu has this bent arm piece that Kopaka and Liwa share. But he has 2 of them, right? So these have the broad shoulders, and then you have Liwa and Kopaka that have the skinny shoulders. And so yet again, there's this style choice that it introduces variability. And you know, this would be the set. It's like you could probably arrange all these Bionicles in different sets where they would have like one thing in common that they wouldn't share, and like almost everyone would be part of like a few different groups, or would have even like one group with someone else, you know. Because you could think about it, Pahatu this way, where it's like, well, if these are his shoulders actually, then he has skinny shoulders, just like these guys. So yeah, I mean, this is the bent arm crew here. And I guess this kind of gets back to something I said in a previous video, which is like, I sort of speculate that probably like Lego had for Bionicle like a color budget for each piece, or you know, each of these colors of plastic. They didn't want to make too many pieces in each color, and so they you know, like that's why these hands aren't in brown, they're in black. And that's why you know, this orange was never, this arm piece isn't an orange, they just used the legs. Because, right, they ended up making all those Nui Rama pieces in orange, for example. So, you know, I'm sure they kind of have had like a, you know, set amount of this polymer, the plastic, that has a, you know, dye in it or whatever, however it works. I'm not exactly sure about the chemistry, but that they had to sort of balance the budget in that regard, I think is probably one of the driving factors. And I think you do see this, right, with creativity is something that at many times is built by constraints. So yeah, I'll just put all the guys here again. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back soon with another video about you know, what is it that makes Bionicle so replayable, so special. Thank you.